This is The Zero Hour with RJ Eskow, produced by the WeAct Radio Network in Washington, D.C., and broadcast across the nation. Visit us online at thisisthezerohour.com or at youtube.com/thezerohour. Ladies and gentlemen, RJ Eskow.
Hello, everyone. I'm Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, and we are back with another episode of The Zero Hour. We have a great show lined up for you, but before we get to that, I have a personal comment I want to make about MSNBC, The Cycle, and Abby Huntsman. As regular listeners of this show know, and as readers of great economic writers like Dean Baker and the Los Angeles Times' Michael Hiltzik know, as well as readers of my own writing at ourfuture.org, Abby Huntsman of MSNBC misled her viewers and viewers of The Cycle a couple weeks ago about Social Security. Note that I said misled. That's important because while it's okay to have conservative opinions, it's not okay to deceive people about the facts. Now, we assumed and would like to continue to assume that this was a simple misunderstanding, misinformation on their part. So radio host Richard Fowler and I responded together as respectively a millennial and a boomer to talk about this issue because we don't want to support this rhetoric of intergenerational war. The fact is that what we really need is for generations to come together to protect the social contract and to protect Social Security. So Richard and I wrote her together. We laid out the factual errors for her. I won't go through all of them now, but the one that I do want to emphasize because it's important now is that Abby Huntsman said there will be nothing left when it comes time for millennials to retire. The fact is that even under concurrent projections, more than 3/4 of the program will be left, and the remainder is easily fixed by lifting the payroll tax cap and having the extremely wealthy pay more and or with the Wall Street tax. So she misled viewers in that and a number of other respects as well. Now, MSNBC chose not to respond, even though there were petitions created and so on, urging The Cycle to correct the record on this. So that means we're now in day 14 of MSNBC and The Cycle held hostage to deceptions and misinformation about Social Security. Now, on day 14 or day 13 of this, depending on when you're watching the show, and depending on air times and so on, Abby Huntsman made the decision essentially to double down by recording yet another commentary on the topic. And by the way, it was my understanding that The Cycle was a panel discussion show, but these commentaries are not recorded for other members of the panel to respond to their solo commentaries. She recorded a second one, which was broadcast yesterday, in which she mischaracterizes the very eloquent response to her written by Michael Hiltzik of the Los Angeles Times, but she also, somewhere out of nowhere, says, guys, this is not about me. That's one of the ways she begins. But I'm sorry, Abby, but this is about you. And here's why. It's because as a broadcaster, no matter what your opinions and no matter where you land on the political spectrum, you, your producers, and your network have a responsibility to the truth. Now, you and I may come from different political perspectives, but if I ever present anything that is factually incorrect on this program or even mildly misleading, and someone brings it to my attention, I will correct it. Abby Huntsman, The Cycle, MSNBC, you didn't do that, and your viewers deserve better. So here's another thing I want to point out. MSNBC presents itself as the counter to Fox Network and to the kind of spin they have over there. It's important it's incumbent on the network not to allow The Cycle to become the spin cycle. So look, almost word for word, we're hearing the same propaganda cooked up by consultants for the Pete Peterson Foundation and Wall Street groups like Fix the Debt, all of which are very interconnected. Pete Peterson, by the way, is the billionaire who's been trying to cut Social Security for years. They have developed marketing strategies, presentation strategies, misleading statistics, misinformation. In Abby Huntsman's two presentations, she repeats and plays out the strategy almost word for word. It's all there. The idea that her opponents are somehow partisan while she is not. Well, I'm not being partisan at all. I'm inviting everyone on the right side of the spectrum to disagree with me about this. I'm just saying, get the fact right. Do not tell your viewers that this program is running out of money. Do not mislead them on the actuarial and statistical data. But no, Abby Huntsman insists that the other people are talking, those of us trying to correct her and correct MSNBC are talking as if we are somehow campaigning for office. She used the word campaign. She used the word partisan. And yet, despite the fact that she's accusing those who disagree with her of being partisan, she trotted out corporate Democratic Party war horses like Ed Rendell, clips of them to support the idea that somehow hers is a nonpartisan idea. Sadly, it is at the national level because bipartisanship at national politics level is sometimes a matter of how much corporate money can buy which partisans. So I'm sorry, your Ed Rendell clips don't impress us. Your Pete Peterson funded strategies don't impress us. Your approach, which seems to be that of being the millennial version of 82-year-old Alan Simpson and saying exactly what he says word for word, refusing to answer the factual corrections brought to your attention, is almost, I thought I was listening, I could close my eyes and almost think when I listen to Abby Huntsman that I'm listening to Alan Simpson. So look, you guys as an organization, and now I'm talking not just to Abby Huntsman, but to the producers of the cycle and to MSNBC, I call upon you, the people who agree with me call upon you not to agree with us, not to have an ideological lockstep on us, but to debate based on the facts. And here's another element that I think you guys really ought to know. I'm not sure your advertisers want their money being spent to misinform viewers. I really think to the extent that MSNBC, again, you guys have Joe Scarborough on in the morning. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with airing different points of view. I have no problem of debates between left and right. I have the problem with misinformation. So I really would like to encourage MSNBC and the producers of the cycle to do the right thing. But I would also like to encourage viewers of this show to let the advertisers on those programs know if you feel that their dollars are going to support misinformation. Again, not to attack Abby Huntsman, not to attack any individuals, but asking them, educating those advertisers about what's being said with their money and asking them as well to join in the process of asking for a correction. And Abby, again, I will direct this to you. If I may call you Abby, you may call me RJ or Richard, whatever you like. I know you said it's not about you, but everything we do in our lives is about us. So is our personal experience. Maybe you haven't had the personal experience of working for 62 years or until you're 65 or 67 in a stand-up job for low pay. But believe me, if you did and you reached the point of retirement, you would not want Social Security cuts. You would not look kindly on people who mislead the public in order to support those cuts. And if you could look at it through those eyes, Alan Simpson, by the way, I'm not singling you out for bad treatment in that sense. Alan Simpson, like you, Abby Huntsman, is the child of enormous wealth and privilege. He too, although he acts folksy, has no idea what it means to work for a living, standing on your feet all day. I shared with my with one of the guests in the upcoming segment, the fact that I used to walk around a shopping mall all day, sweeping up garbage. And I'm not. Am I proud of myself for doing that? It's what I had to do. If I had to do that at age 65, I'd be struggling. I would think you'd want to tell the truth about that, no matter what your political opinions here. Now, I'm just speaking as an individual here, but I would be honored and pleased if viewers of the Zero Hour were to let MSNBC and advertisers on the cycle know that this is not the way we think we should conduct a political debate. Listen, I don't think this story is going away. I know perhaps they think it was clever to perhaps, broadcasters love controversy. It draws in viewers and that sort of thing. Maybe that's why they had Abby Huntsman take another crack at this story. But I implore you, executives of MSNBC, to hold your broadcasters to a higher standard. I implore you, advertisers at MSNBC, to take a look at what's going on. Again, not retribution. I'm not talking about boycott or retribution or firing. I'm talking about educating everyone involved in this process, educating the broadcasters at MSNBC regarding the real truth about Social Security's financial status, educating the producers of these programs so that they don't spread misinformation in the future, educating the executives at MSNBC so that they don't permit it. And yes, educating the advertisers as well. Again, this is just my personal opinion, but I think we need more of that information sharing. And I would encourage, look, it's already clear that the producers of The Cycle don't want me or Dean Baker or Michael Hiltzik or someone else, Richard Fowler, to come out there and debate with them. And if that holds true, that's fine. I don't need the publicity. They don't need the publicity. But then why at least can't Abby Huntsman respond to her own fellow panelists on this? But in the meantime, I urge everyone involved in this to educate themselves. I urge my viewers to educate those involved in the process. I will continue to stay on this story. It's certainly not going away here at the 0 hour, and I don't want it to go away for America, because Social Security is a program not that divides generations, but which brings them together in a web of mutual support and trust. And until that program is safe and expanded for future generations to offset the maldistribution of wealth that has occurred in recent decades, I'll keep fighting for it. You may think differently. And as they say, it's true of me and it's true of you. You're entitled to your own opinions, but not your own facts. So I'm RJ Eskow, speaking for the facts, speaking for Social Security, speaking for the concept of truth in advocacy journalism, no matter what side of the debate you're on. I'll continue to fight that fight. I hope you'll join me. I'm RJ Eskow, and this is the 0 Hour. This is Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, and we are back with another edition of the 0 Hour. Our next guest is Robert Naiman. Robert Naiman is policy director at Just Foreign Policy. He edits the Just Foreign Policy news summary and writes on U.S. foreign policy at Huffington Post. He is president of the board of Truthout, where I am published from time to time, a fine publication, truthout.org, and is on the steering committee of Gaza's Ark, a project to bring a boat out of Gaza filled with Palestinian exports. And he is here today to talk about the United States and its role or lack thereof in international law and collaboration. Bob, are you with us?
Yes.
Thanks so much for joining us, first of all. And I really wanted to highlight the post you did recently on the United States' relationship with international law, which you described as a tryst. You said, we have a tryst with international law, and could we deepen the romance? Could you tell us just very briefly what you mean by that?
Well, in the wake of the Russian military intervention in Crimea, the Obama administration has talked a great game about international law and has taken the unusual step of seeking to enforce international law against Russia, which is a member of the permanent member of the UN Security Council. So, according to historical practice, kind of exempt in practice from enforcement of international law like the United States. The Obama administration is using sanctions, has worked with the European Union to try to punish sanction Russia for violating international law, even though it's a member of the UN Security Council. So I argue, and I'm trying to rally others around the idea that this is a unique historical moment, a moment when the United States, which historically has taken the attitude that, international law, that's not for us, that's for the little people to follow. This is a moment when the Obama administration is pounding the table talking about the international law, actually trying to do something to compel Russia, a major power, to comply with international law. Let's use this precedent to try to get the United States to comply with international law. People have talked about, rightly, the hypocrisy of the United States, comparing it to the Iraq War. The thing about the Iraq War, it's a great example to show the hypocrisy, except for one thing. It's in the past. Violations of international law by the United States are happening right now, and we could do something about it. Right now, the Obama administration, and particularly John Brennan, blocking efforts to hold the CIA and the U.S. government accountable for CIA use of torture during the Bush administration. Right now, the Obama administration, the CIA, failing to comply with international law and the CIA's use of drone strikes. Right now, the CIA, the Obama administration, violating international law by arming rebels in Syria. These violations, unlike the Iraq War, are happening right now. We could do something about them. And that's why we're actually putting out a call, on MoveOn. We have thousands of signatures already for boycott and sanctions on John Brennan. Just like the Obama administration's under Russia, sanctioning Russian officials involved in the violation of international law. We're calling for
John Brennan being the national security director of the Obama
John Brennan is the head of the CIA. He is the point man on these violations that I've just talked about. Drone strikes, CIA torture, and arming rebels in Syria. John Brennan, the head of the CIA, in charge of this. We're calling for boycott and sanctions of John Brennan until the CIA takes concrete, observable steps to move towards compliance with international law.
Well, how does one boycott or sanction a government official? Just tell us how that might work. How do you sanction a member of the administration?
Well, U.S. citizens, we can't sanction, but we can boycott. Civil society can boycott. For example, not long ago, John Brennan was invited to give a commencement address at Fordham University and got an honorary degree. There were protests there. So that's something we could stop. Civil society could stop and say, no honorary degrees for John Brennan. No honor or recognition or award or anything nice should happen to John Brennan from civil society. The only events that he should be invited to are events that are focused on the CIA's compliance or lack of compliance with international law, or events in which there is an opportunity to challenge John Brennan and the CIA's lack of compliance with international law.
Well, that sounds like a good idea, but people might ask, why isolate Brennan when he's part of a larger administration? What about the Secretary of State? What about the Secretary of Defense? What about the President? Your thoughts on that?
Like all boycotts, why pick on Walmart when there are other bad corporations? Every boycott, you pick a target who's the best symbol to organize around. John Brennan is the best symbol to organize around because he's the head of the CIA. Are there other guilty parties in the administration? Absolutely. When the Obama administration went to do sanctions on Russia, they picked particular officials. Of course, other officials are involved. Just the United States. Of course, other officials are involved. But John Brennan is the lead. He is the symbol. He's the one in charge of the CIA, shielding the CIA on torture. He's the one in charge of shielding the CIA from accountability international law on drone strike. He's the one in charge of arming rebels in Syria. So he is the perfect symbol. If we can hold John Brennan accountable, should we move on to other officials in the administration? Absolutely. But this is a great place to start.
And people can find more information on this as well as join this effort at moveon.org?
That's correct. MoveOn or at our website, justforeignpolicy.org.
Well, thanks so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk to us about it. We'll be tracking it, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us again. We've been speaking with Robert Naiman, who is Policy Director of Just Foreign Policy. Thanks so much for being with us.
Good to be with you.
I'm Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow. We will be right back. This is The Zero Hour.
listening to the We Act Radio Network, produced in Washington, D.C. Visit us online at weactradio.com or at youtube.com/weactradiodc.
And we are back on the 0 hour. And so is that echo in my headset? No, I think it's gone now. Okay. It's great to have you back. Thanks for sticking with us through the break. And our next guest is Josh Eidelson, who does a lot of great reporting for Salon on the labor beat, as well as politics and inequality, which ought to keep you pretty busy.
You are listening to the We Act Radio Network, produced in Washington, D.C. Visit us online at weactradio.com or at youtube.com/weactradiodc.
And we are back on the 0 hour. And so is that echo in my headset? No, I think it's gone now. Okay. It's great to have you back. Thanks for sticking with us through the break. And our next guest is Josh Eidelson, who does a lot of great reporting for Salon on the labor beat, as well as politics and inequality, which ought to keep you pretty busy. Basically, what I wanted to talk to Josh about was his recent interview with Senator Alan Simpson. Now, Alan Simpson, like Abby Huntsman, is part of this small group that seems obsessed with the idea that Social Security is in crisis, number one. Number two, that Social Security is part of our overall budget crisis. And number three, that the solution for that is to keep taxes low for the wealthiest among us and for corporations while at the same time hitting the middle class with destructive cuts. And yet he's supposed to be a wonderful character. That's the talk in Washington. He comes across very differently if you're not part of the insider group. But I understand that Josh is with us now. Josh, are you on the line?
I am. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks so much for coming in. You do a lot of great work at Salon, and I read your stuff religiously, but so we would have wanted you on at some point anyway, but I just couldn't resist talking to you about Alan Simpson. Apparently, I read with great interest your piece on Simpson, and apparently you actually managed to have an audience with the great man. Is that right?
I did. I talked to him by phone, and it was an interesting conversation.
Now, of course, interesting can mean many things. It's one of my favorite euphemisms, too. But, you know, he can be abrasive. In fact, he's known for being abrasive, nasty, contrary, and especially given to rages when someone challenges him on the facts, let's say. At first, I just out of curiosity, how did you get him?
I had reached out previously during the fight over the government shutdown and had not gotten through, and this time he was back in the news again, actually, for his support for gay marriage rights, which is to his credit, and that created an opportunity to reach out again, and in this case I was put in touch and very glad to be able to connect with him, given that Senator Simpson is someone who not only the media but also the President of the United States have elevated to be a person of unfortunate influence in the debates that take place about the budget and the debt.
Right. I mean, look, from what I can tell, and a lot of this stuff is secretive, but I've done my own digging and research on the Peterson Foundation and the other groups working to cut Social Security. And I think Alan Simpson, besides being a child of privilege himself, has been in their employ off and on for some time. But it appears that way. It's hard for me to verify. But he's certainly been pushing that line of thinking, which you correctly characterize as unfortunate. And since Alan Simpson has come out in favor of gay marriage, I'd just be interested in your thoughts. I've felt for a while now that the liberal wing of the oligarchy has decided to use marriage equality and other individual rights issues as the way to put a liberal gloss on, sure, gays can marry each other as long as we still control the money. Now, I'm curious to know if you agree with that or if you think I'm being overly dark in my interpretation.
Well, I would say two things. I would say on the one hand that the issue of people's ability, regardless of their sexuality, to get all of the tremendous economic as well as social and cultural benefits that come with marriage in the United States, if they want them, is tremendously important. That's not to say that it is more important than issues like employment discrimination, which haven't gotten as much attention, either from the media or arguably from LGBT groups. And so I think it would, not to say that you are, but it would be a mistake to discount the significance of some of these issues and the tremendous progress that we've seen there. That said, it is certainly the case that if you are a major corporation in the United States, then you have much less to fear from gay people being able to marry each other and get recognition than from gay workers being able to organize and win protections in collective bargaining agreements and actually take away some of your power to control what happens there, or your power to control not only people's sexuality, but people's gender performance, people's speech outside of the workplace, all kinds of things that corporations would like to have in their discretion, whether they exercise it in a right-wing way or in a middle-of-the-road way. And it is interesting to notice, and I've written about this at Salon before, including in critiquing Frank Bruni's take on Liz Cheney, that issues of gay marriage get talked about even by somewhat mainstream media outlets in a way as though they were fundamentally moral issues that is in contrast to the lens that things like food stamp cuts get talked about in a lot of media coverage.
Right, and absolutely. I think we're on exactly the same page, and I certainly was not suggesting for a moment that those things aren't critically important, but rather that I think on the liberal-ish spectrum of corporate influence and so on, that it's been decided that that's one that can be given away pretty much for free, and hope that people will be satisfied with that and not with addressing some of the other issues. And it constantly makes me think of, for example, Dr. Martin Luther King, who throughout his career to the very end never separated economic issues from issues of civil rights, because he understood that, as he put it, the right to sit at the lunch counter doesn't mean much to me if I don't have the money to pay for the meal. So that was my only point there. So I think we're in the same agreement. What would you say were your big takeaways in your interview with Simpson? Was he uninformed? Was he defensive? Was he courteous? What was the big takeaway for you?
Well, I was struck by the number of questions that Senator Simpson did not really answer. I opened the interview by asking about why he is devoting his energies, and including energies directed at my generation, to the issue of the debt and getting us concerned about the debt rather than climate change or about mass unemployment. And he engaged in what you might call a bit of senior splaining towards me about how when he was my age, he was a knucklehead and so forth. But he didn't say anything about why climate change or mass unemployment is not a more urgent issue than the U.S. government debt. Similarly, when I asked about whether we should avoid raising the Social Security retirement age faster than life expectancy is actually going up for large swaths of people, at least as measured when you look at people who make it to 65, he didn't answer that question. Instead, he started talking about overall ratios and how they've changed. But the issue that actually in the period of time that already we saw this increase of 2 years, we saw an increase of less than that in the life expectancy of male workers who retired at 65 in the bottom half of the income distribution. He didn't really address. He also didn't address my question about why in a deficit reduction report you would actually cap the amount of revenue that the government can take in. A lot of us intuitively would think the last thing you would want to do in a report about how to reduce the amount of money the government owes would be to cap the amount of money that the government is allowed to take in.
Well, absolutely. I mean, to me, they're always saying government should think more like a business, which is a stupid idea. But that aside, and I was in business. No business I ever worked for, no corporation I ever worked for said, let's put out our plan for the next 5 years. And let's make sure we have a maximum amount of revenue that we can earn during that point of view. I mean, I think that's not thinking like a business. Here's we only have about a minute left, but here's my money, the key moment for me in your interview with Simpson, where you began by pointing out that all his doomsday scenarios so far haven't come true. And then you said, and he rambles incessantly around the point of that one, I thought, Brownie, a verbal equivalent of Brownie in motion, I would say. And then he says, is there any indicator that makes you think that your scenario is more likely or closer now than when you were testifying in 2011? He begins by saying, I have no idea. And to which the logical follow-up that we're all too curious to answer is, then why are you talking? Of number one, but number two, then he starts to use his grotesque breast analogies and milk and all that for programs that people have paid for. So, first of all, it was a great scoop to get him, but do you agree with me that was kind of the key moment there? And what should people's takeaway be?
It was quite striking to me. It was really quite striking, and it is interesting whether you're looking at this supposed creditor nightmare that never happens, or you're talking about the Iraq War, that what gets you considered or no longer considered a serious person is striking, and there are some kinds of predictions you can constantly make and not really seem to suffer for it. I do also think, though, that something that I was surprised didn't get more attention in the response to this piece was the comment that type 2 diabetes, the most common form of diabetes, is mostly self-induced. I think well captures who it is that gets blamed in a lot of these debates and the kind of attitude and, frankly, contempt that gets directed at a lot of non-wealthy people in the United States, and also the less than tight relationship with science and empiricism of some of the people who wield a lot of influence over these debates.
Well, of course, he's absolutely right. And I think we can close with that we're dealing with a mentality that says, how dare you, as a U.S. citizen, develop essentially genetic disease without my level of income? You're a member of the 47%, my friend. So we'll have to leave it at that. But Josh Eidelson, reporter for Salon, thanks so much for coming and joining us on the Zero Hour.
Thank you very much.
And we will be right back after this. And we are back on the Zero Hour. As our regular listeners know, we are very big on covering the digital bro complex that is today's Silicon Valley, and I've been really looking forward to speaking with our next guest who's done terrific reporting on that. Mark Ames is a writer for Pando Daily. He is the founding editor of the satirical Moscow biweekly The Exile, which every good writer that I know knows about. That's Exile with a small e and a large X, as if E.E. Cummings and Malcolm X had gotten together. He's the author of Going Postal, Rage, Murder, and Rebellion, and the co-author of The Exile, again with that capitalization, Sex, Drugs, and Libel in the New Russia. Mark, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Hey, listen, I wanted to talk to you about your great writing on what you call, and I might pronounce this wrong, the Tectopus? The Tectopus? Yeah. How am I doing?
Might be slightly awkward. I mean, it's meant to be an obvious, reference to the Octopus, the book by the classic novel by Frank Norris about the octopus, the tentacles of power from the railroad companies and the bankers and so on, and how it controlled and affected everyone's lives right down to small farmers in the San Joaquin Valley. And because as I'm getting more into the power of Silicon Valley and technology and their billions of dollars and their ability to reshape, industries and people's lives, I find myself going back to the last big technological explosion or revolution, whatever you call it, in the late 1800s with the railroads and communication lines and so on, and how that reshaped industries and lives, and how these guys were just they reshaped people's lives without people quite grasping it for a couple of decades. What forces were really hemming them in and controlling them, and also this is a period of a massive concentration of wealth and power and control over the democracy.
Well, I think this is such an important topic, and I'm so glad you're on it, because for a number of reasons, one of which is that our culture seems to exalt these guys who are enormously, in my experience, self-centered, self-driven, and, if anything, just foolishly naive about politics to the extent that they care at all. And now all over the world of meditation and Buddhism and mindfulness, and we had a Google executive telling a monk, if you were born too soon, if you'd been born in my era, you would work for Google. So we have this, we have this extraordinary stuff going on, and nobody's really talking about the fact that these guys are the kind of they're J. Pierpont Morgan and flip-flops, basically. And so I'm really glad you're on it, and glad especially that you've been writing about the I can't call it price fixing, but the illegal
wage fixing. It's really wage fixing, Cartel. What it is.
Well, tell us about it a little bit. Give us a minute on that.
Yeah, really quickly. So in the mid 2000s, 2005 or so, the big heavy part of this cartel was arranged between Steve Jobs of Apple and Eric Schmidt and Sergey Brin of Google, and then a few others, the head of Intuit, the head of Intel eventually, in which what was happening in 2005 is that the wages for tech engineers and programmers and so on were starting to soar through the roof and cutting into revenues, into profits, which then, hurts shareholders and hurts these guys, these billionaires. So they devised a secret and illegal series of agreements with each other not to recruit each other's employees, not to cold call recruit, which actually cold calling in Silicon Valley at least is considered by the companies and by recruiters the best way to get the best talent.
Because their argument is the best talent is not looking for work. Exactly.
And but by agreeing not to cold call or recruit each other's employees, what you start to do is you, and this is again classic sort of robber baron stuff. You take out information, you take out competition from the labor market. I mean, for lack of better words, I'm going to use their own terminology. So that means workers don't even know really what they're worth. They don't even know that they're not being recruited because their CEOs way above them made this secret agreement. They don't even know their worth because they're not being called. And
so wait a minute, hold on. So you're saying that these guys who preach the gospel of libertarianism, cybernetic libertarianism, are actually fixing markets. That's not a very libertarian thing to do, is it?
No, exactly. And these agreements, what I found in some of my updates by pouring through the court dockets, is that these agreements extended far beyond Silicon Valley. And this is kind of why I called it the Tectopus, because the tentacles of this thing, it began in Silicon Valley, these series of non-recruitment agreements, which violates the Sherman Antitrust Act, violates the Clayton Antitrust Act. These agreements spread across industries and across oceans. So you had Comcast, Clear Channel, Microsoft, Dell, the public relations giant in London, WPP, which has 122,000 employees. So you had, you're talking now potentially hundreds and hundreds of thousands of employees And this is only what we know. And I'm finding more and more companies were involved in this.
And this is very important because this is basically anybody with a skill that's, as I understand it, anybody with a skill marketable to the Silicon Valley was subject to this sort of blackout. And, you know, when I was working in the tech world many years ago, and Frank Norris was still alive, I think, I was recruited 3 times from one job to another. So you're basically saying the rigging the market, you're pointing the finger at Steve Jobs as being a key player in this and quite a brutal one. So in the minute that we have left, what are you working on next on this story? I just think it's incredibly important.
Well, I went to a hearing yesterday, and there's talk of, and you know, from a citizen's point of view, I hope they don't settle. I mean, I'm for the workers getting what is just for them, what they believe is just for them in terms of compensation, but I would like to know more about this. So there was some talk of a potential settlement in the hearing yesterday. The trial starts in May. It may have just been talk, though. You know, you don't know anything until it actually happens.
And you're going to stay on this until then.
Absolutely. So the trial starts in May, and I'm going to stay on it through then. Exactly.
Well, you're doing great work. I encourage everybody listening to listen to Mark Ames and read him at Pando Daily, writing about the tentacles of corporate power from the Silicon Valley, wage fixing, and their distortionary effect on the economy. Mark, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm RJ Eskow, and we will be right back after this. You are listening to The Zero Hour. Thank you.
.org.
This is The Zero Hour with RJ Eskow, produced by the WEACT Radio Network in Washington, D.C., and broadcast across the nation. Visit us online at thisisthezerohour.com or at youtube.com/thezerohour. Ladies and gentlemen, RJ Eskow.
Welcome back. I'm Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, and you are listening to Hour 2 of the Zero Hour. So I guess that is the second Zero Hour. But more to the point, we've got a great hour coming up for you. We're going to be talking about ALEC and the lobbying organization for corporations and some lavish steak dinners that took place down in Arizona. We're going to be talking about some corporate money games that are going on, and we'll be talking about the NCAA. So we've got all that coming up for you in the next hour. Stick around. It's going to be a good one. But first, I want to talk to you about another big item in the news, and I mean big item in the news this week, and that's Chris Christie's alleged vindication. We were told by Governor Christie's organization that he has been vindicated. The Republican governor paid a law firm something like $650 an hour, reportedly more than $1 million, to investigate his own alleged wrongdoing in the Bridgegate scandal and with the Hurricane Sandy funds. And guess what? This Wall Street and Republican-connected firm has decided that there's no evidence of wrongdoing on the governor's part. Now, if nothing else, these allegations are still open to question. Let's put it this way. He's alienated the people of Hoboken with his Hurricane Sandy threats. He's alienated the people of Fort Lee with his bridge clothings. So one thing we know for certain, if you try to get on the George Washington Bridge and get lost, you'll be driving among people who don't like Governor Chris Christie right now. What did the report actually say? Apparently it says Chris Christie has hired a woman named Bridget Kelly to run his office, and, well, it looks like Bridget Kelly went rogue. Now, to be fair, anybody who's ever known Catholic high school girls in their life, and I have had that experience, knows that something like the phrase Bridget Kelly went rogue has been spoken many times. But in this case, not so sure. They're saying that his chief of staff, Bridget Kelly, somehow betrayed him and he didn't even know it. They're saying that someone he knew since high school, David Wildstein, was also part of the problem. Now, Wildstein says he was Chris Christie's friend in high school, but Chris Christie says they weren't. He says he hardly knew the guy because Chris Christie, was a big high school jock, a star. And this guy, he said, well, I don't know what he was doing. So even as Chris Christie tells the story, a big high school jock turns out to act dickishly towards some guy who wasn't as cool as him in high school. Hey, who knew that would happen? Something else, too, by the way. I can't be the only person here surprised that Chris Christie used to be a good athlete. But they claim that of the governor's original staff, the people that he hired, and by that I mean people who worked directly for him, Bridget Kelly acted alone. Why would she do that? Now they're saying it's because she was jilted by a boyfriend. Have you heard a more sexist explanation in your life? In fact, they use the word emotional to describe her, despite the fact that supposedly, according to this lawyer's report, Chris Christie shed tears when he was talking about how hurt and betrayed he felt and begging his staff to come forward if they had any information. It's the only woman in the story who gets described as emotional. So, you know what? Apparently, they resorted to good old-fashioned sexism. Who knew that would happen? Now, even Christie's own lawyers are compelled to report what we now know as public fact, which is that Wildstein says he told Christie about the lane closings, but Christie says he doesn't remember. You know, that's really, really odd. It gets even odder when you consider the fact that these lawyers couldn't even talk to Bridget Kelly or David Wildstein, so they didn't get their side of the story at all. But you know what's really interesting about this? What's really interesting is when you start to look into who these lawyers really were. Let's take a look for a second. You know, the New York Times reported, said this: skeptics have zeroed in. Yeah, I call myself a skeptic on Gibson Dunn's, that's the law firm's, close ties to Mr. Christie's office. The firm has worked for the administration in the past, and a top partner at the firm was involved in the internal inquiry. Deborah Wong Yang is a friend of the governor's. Now, that is interesting, and it does raise reason for skepticism, but let's look at who actually authored the report. Randy Mastro. He's the lawyer who led the internal investigation. He's defended, and this is me talking, he's defended the depth and impartiality of his inquiry, saying it was quote unquote comprehensive and exhaustive. Except that is, of course, for the part about not interviewing the two key witnesses. But who is Randy Mastro? His law firm's website says he's co-chair of the firm's crisis management group. And this is where it gets interesting. What does that group do? According to the Gibson Dunn website, quote, the right response to a crisis, whether it is a whistleblower's surprise allegation, meaning that's the crisis, a significant and unexpected accounting problem, a product recall, or a government investigation, requires a cohesive team equipped to take immediate action on multiple fronts. Well, this looks like one of those fronts to me, doesn't it to you? Let's go on. Gibson Dunn also says members of this team are experienced in developing and implementing prompt and effective media strategies to address any situation. Doesn't it sound to you like the taxpayers in New Jersey spent $1 million on Chris Christie's media strategy? It's fair to ask, was Gibson Dunn investigating a scandal or managing a crisis for a client? We report, you decide. Well, a few other things. Mastro was vice mayor for Rudy Giuliani of a noun, a verb, and 9/11 fame. And his corporate clients, here's a partial list: Amazon.com, Bank of New York Mellon, Empire Blue Cross, JP Morgan, GE Capital, Dow Jones, Verizon, Bear Stearns, UBS Financial Services, Prudential Securities, and Lehman Brothers. Okay, that's who we've got supposedly digging out the facts on behalf of the citizens of New Jersey. According to the firm's own website, The New Yorker has described Randy Mastro as, quote unquote, a merciless litigator, even by the pugilistic standards of the New York bar. That's who conducted the, quote unquote, impartial inquiry. That's Chris Christie's lawyer, the pugilistic, merciless litigator who supposedly was impartial in this case. The taxpayers of New Jersey are out a considerable sum of money for Gibson Dunn's services, and all they have is a report of no value meant to serve Chris Christie. Hey, who knew that would happen? We'll be right back. I'm Richard Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour. we are back on the Zero Hour, and looking forward to talking again with Patrick Hruby, who writes for Sports on Earth. He's a former adjunct professor at Georgetown University. He's an award-winning journalist. He contributes to the Atlantic Online. He's a great sports writer, Washingtonian Magazine, Political Magazine, and elsewhere. I write for elsewhere too, actually. I haven't seen your byline there. Hey, Patrick, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thanks for having me.
So listen, you've been doing a lot of great writing about this notion of All Players United, which is a group that's talking about unionizing college athletes. And the response from the NCAA has been, hey, 90% of our revenues, which are huge, go to the student athletes. And you've been doing a lot of great research into this whole story. Why would they want to unionize? Where does that money really go? Is there fuzzy math going on? So tell us, why would college students, they're supposed to be there for an education, they're scholar athletes, why would they want to unionize?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, if the overall economic structure of college sports is one in which the labor force, the athletes, essentially have no rights. If you look at it from an antitrust perspective, these schools are allowed to collude. They're allowed to tell athletes, we will pay you in the form of a scholarship and nothing more. We will not compete and bid for your services, unlike every other workplace in America. That's like the big picture thing. In terms of what they want, they want rights. They want to have a voice. They want to have a seat at the table. Right now, the schools dictate the terms, and they have to accept it. And if the schools were less greedy, and if they were more willing to give their workforce, some basic rights protections, you wouldn't really start to see this unionization push.
Well, you raised a couple really interesting issues there, starting with the most fundamental economic one, which is also philosophical, which is whether student athletes, as generators of massive amounts of revenue, should be allowed to negotiate for their services, and should economic forces be allowed to come into play, competition and so on, which is interesting because, when you think about it, they always have under the table. There have always been recruiting scandals and this and that. So in effect, the argument might be put that out in the open, make it legitimate and honest, and allow these young people to get the fair market value for their services. But I guess people would say the missing part of that equation is the education part. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say, two things. First of all, go back to your own college experience. Many of your listeners, many people out there, if not most, had some kind of job when they were in college, a part-time job, maybe a full-time job, potentially a campus job. At no point does working and earning money take away from your ability to get education or to get a degree. Those two things are actually separate. You can work in the school cafeteria, and you can still get A's. There's nothing wrong with either one of those things. Only for athletes do we created this weird and unique system where we say, you're an amateur, and God forbid you earn any money from playing your sport, even though there's an enormous market for your sport, even though people wanting to watch your sport generates millions and billions of dollars, and you are the product. You are the product on the playing field. You're the thing that people want to watch. Nobody is tuning in to March Madness to watch these athletic directors. They're tuning in to watch the guys on the floor. And yet the athletic directors are the ones getting $1 million a year salaries, while the players are limited to the value of scholarships. So it really, education is completely separate. It's completely separate from working. The way that the NCAA has sort of conflated those two things, to me, is one of the great scandals of the last century.
And now you add to that the fact that some of these schools don't give a decent education to their athletes, but you hear those stories all the time too. It gets even more complex. But thought experiment time, because you think, broadly as well as specifically about sports, which is one of the things I like about your writing. So, let's kind of play out the scenario. Let's say that this cartel, for lack of a better word, NCAA cartel, were broken, and student athletes could negotiate for their ability, based on their ability and so on. What would happen to the wall, such as it is, that exists now, economically between student sports and so-called professional sports?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad, by the way, you used the word cartel. This is a fun fact. The NCAA, it's not the right choice of word. It is a cartel, and I'm not saying this myself. One of the NCAA's own economic witnesses, expert witnesses in one of the court cases right now, in his own textbook that is taught in college classes, also refers to the NCAA as a cartel. So I just want to make that clear. In terms of how this would play out, if we got rid of amateurism, if there was some sort of free market, I don't think the changes would be as dramatic as some people think. Number one, the NCAA often says, well, if we have to start paying these revenue-producing athletes, we're not going to be able to afford women's lacrosse and men's wrestling and the non-revenue sports. That's bogus. There's a ton of money in the system. And what happens right now is this money basically goes to bigger athletic director salaries, bigger coaching salaries, which we've all seen, and it goes to building bigger and fancier facilities. There's kind of a gold-plating effect that happens because the money is limited from going to the actual talent. So what you would see is a redistribution of some of that money. I don't think a school would necessarily cut its wrestling team to pay its football players, but they might pay the football coach half of what he's making now because there wouldn't be as much money around to pay him. I don't have a problem with that. I also think the idea that, somehow this would, again, negatively impact education, you make a great point. A lot of these places, when you're talking about the big-time athletes that are in the big-time sports that make the big-time money, they're majoring in eligibility. In fact, all you have to do is look at the testimony in the Northwestern case. And by the way, Northwestern is a great academic school that most of these guys are graduating, but they talk about how they have to change their majors because they can't fit into their football schedule. They talk about how they're encouraged to do that. And you look at other schools, look at what's happened at North Carolina with the academic scandals there. And you could look at a guy, Shane Battier, an NBA player, played at Duke, very, very smart guy. He majored in religion at Duke, not because he wanted to, but because that was the only major that fit his basketball schedule. These guys are working 50, 60, 70 hours a week at their sports. And like I said, it's work. It's a job. You can call it something else, but if you look at what they're doing, you're just being semantic at that point.
Well, absolutely. And to me, this whole business about coaches and coach reimbursement, every time a coach has a bad season, everybody says, what are we paying millions to that bum for? I even think, this goes to the whole 99%, 1% issue for me. Even I don't mind somebody getting a good income, an excellent income for being great at what they do. But the question is, how much is too much when you're talking about college athletics? I think the coaches who have a good season get overpaid. So I think this is an excellent point. And one of the anecdotes that came out of this whole story that was so striking to me, and as we, in our last couple of minutes, I'd love your comments on it, was the one about the wrestling coach who got an $18,000 bonus because a single wrestler won a match. The kid didn't get anything for winning the match. The coach got $18,000. What does that say about our system?
Well, here's what's even funnier. It wasn't the coach. It was the athletic director at the school. So it was some bureaucrat, a couple levels removed from the coach. It was essentially the guy who hired the coach. I guarantee you that athletic director is not even, he's not going to wrestling practice and teaching the wrestlers how to win. He has nothing to do, basically at all, with the kid who actually won the title, who probably should be the one getting some sort of bonus if there's going to be a bonus. But you know what? That story says everything about what is wrong with this system. And I'm so glad you made the comparison to the 1% and the 99%, because this is the problem with the whole system. It's not a free market, but it's a rigged market. Like I said, it's not that these coaches necessarily make too much or not enough. It's that there's so much money available to them because the labor force has the deck rigged and stacked against them, and they are not allowed to make any of that money. And that does speak to the bigger economic inequalities in this country, where we have an economy that, over 20, 30, 40 years has been rigged so that the rules favor the people at the top, and the money flows up to them. It's the exact same thing that's going on in college sports.
And you know what's
are not being shared by the workers.
And you know what's striking about this is that we just did a story right before you came on about how Silicon Valley fixes wages and the
Right.
way labor market. To me, it's the same deal. It's the talent is getting exploited and manipulated, and more power, in my opinion, more power to these students for becoming aware of how they're being treated and organizing and doing something about it. I don't know about you, but I say the kids are all right.
I'm all for it. And by the way, they're not even right now talking about getting money. They just want better, like, medical care, better health protections, better concussion protections. I mean, it's really quite amazing once you have that power imbalance, what kind of abuses result. And I'm with you. I hope these kids take it all the way, and I hope this changes the landscape of college sports.
Absolutely. You know, you listed, and we'll close with this, you listed the point of last year's protest, showing support for athletes suing the NCAA over its handling of concussions and brain trauma, minimizing brain damage, policies to minimize brain damage, and antitrust lawsuit against the NCAA regarding the use of player likenesses, which we haven't even gotten into. This is a great story. Patrick Hruby, I hope you stay on it and you'll come back and talk to us again.
Will do.
That's what we're up against, and that's what we like to talk about here. Please stick with us. We'll be back talking about how the game works when you're buying $70 steaks for legislators in Phoenix, Arizona. That's an interesting story, too. Please stick with us. I'm Richard Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.
Network, produced in Washington, D.C. Visit us online at weactradio.com or at youtube.com/weactradiodc.
Of Southeast D.C.
And we are back on the Zero Hour. Our guest in this segment is Robbie Sherwood. Robbie is Executive Director of Progress Now Arizona, as well as Director of Arizona Operations for Strategies 360, formerly a political reporter, as well as former senior advisor to a U.S. representative. He's done a lot of great things. He was a regular commentator on the PBS public affairs show Horizon. He's done a lot of teaching. He's done a lot of great journalism. The only thing in his biography I question is he says he lives with his family and an overweight rescue cat named Alicia. Now, Robbie, couldn't we have left Alicia's weight out of this?
Well, yeah, she's Rubenesque, but it just makes her more beautiful to me.
There's more to love. Now, thanks so much for coming on, because this is a great story, and I want to learn more about the backdrop on it. But CBS local affiliate there, I think it was CBS 5 Investigates is the program, got video of lobbyists from the American Legislative Exchange Council, infamously known as ALEC, to those of us who follow these things, corporate far-right influence peddling group. And this was video of them having a big party, or a heck of a dinner anyway, at Donovan's Steakhouse, where the cheapest steak I could find was the peppercorn at $51, and they seem to run about $70. My favorite shot in the video is the lobbyist running back from the bar with a bottle of scotch saying, I got it.
That wasn't a lobbyist, that was a lawmaker, but I don't mean to interrupt your flow there. But.
Well, who picked up the tab?
Not him. It was. I don't know exactly which special interest picked up the tab, but it certainly wasn't any of the 17 to 19 lawmakers who were in attendance.
So there were 17 to 19 lawmakers having a big party at Donovan's Steakhouse. And what's the significance of this event to you? What does this tell you, other than, wow, they can really pack it in and drink up? What's the deeper or broader significance of this story?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's my first time, so I appreciate that. And as a longtime political reporter covering the state legislature, on one level, this didn't surprise me at all. It's not that unusual for lawmakers and lobbyists to get together and socialize, and for lobbyists to pick up the tab, at least not in Arizona. The public is largely unaware of how that operates, but if you're a reporter, you've probably seen it enough to become jaded about it. Why I thought this was interesting was because ALEC, this was a recruitment dinner for ALEC, and it's really sort of a peek into how they operate. What's significant is not the stakes and the free liquor and everything that was going on inside Donovan's. That's just to get the members on board and be full-fledged ALEC members. Where ALEC really does its work is when they then fly those members back on expense-paid, very lavish, extravagant, luxurious vacation junkets back to Washington, D.C., or to Chicago, or to other cities for these conferences that they do in the off-session, which are closed to the public. Corporate interests pay to play. They pay to be a part of these. And they sit down with these lawmakers and they develop draft model legislation outside the public eye with no public testimony, just the lawmakers and their corporate benefactors. And, people constantly say in Arizona, I'm sure they say it in your state as well, where do they get these ideas? Where does this stuff come from? Well, this is where. It happens in these conferences, and by the time the bill is put in the hopper and, there's public testimony and that process, it's really too late to make any significant changes. The bills have been written and workshopped already outside the public eye. And to me, I wanted to expose how that system works.
Well, and we're syndicated, so we're in a number of states, and through the magic of the internet, we're pretty much everywhere. So I think it's important for people also to understand that ALEC operates essentially in every state. That's why you see so much model legislation appearing in state after state that's so similar, whether it's the Financial Emergency Manager Act that's appeared in Michigan but also been introduced elsewhere, that allows the governor, in Michigan's case a Republican, to take over local city governments, or whether you have the Stand Your Ground laws, which are infamously associated with them. So they're having one of the interesting and important things about ALEC, and you've been involved in Arizona politics, also written and reported on national politics. One of the important things to me is that they've come up with a very smart strategy, which is by working at this local level. I mean, we might say, what does a national audience care about some partying legislatures at a steakhouse in Arizona? But as you say, isn't this really the footprint of a national attempt to shift the focus of government?
It is, and it's been very successful on their behalf. I would throw into some of the issues that they've pushed, private school vouchers, efforts to undo public education, attacks on organized labor and workers' rights, and attacks on voting rights and voter suppression. All have ALEC DNA and fingerprints. But yeah, it was an effort, and forgive me if I don't know the exact years. It goes back a number of years in which ALEC has been around for 35, 40 years. But at some point, they made a strategic shift to stop trying to lobby Congress and to instead work to get their pro-corporate and right-wing policies enacted at state legislatures. And it's been remarkably successful. They actually say they don't lobby, or they purport to say they don't lobby. And technically that may be the case because they don't come down to your legislature and testify on a bill. As I noted, the work has already been done. They bring the lawmakers to them and workshop the bills and send out model legislation back to numerous state legislatures at once, and it has helped the rapid proliferation and spread of some of these ideas, like Stand Your Ground.
Well, let me ask you though. On behalf of our audience, a lot of people are going to be wondering, aren't there any laws against this sort of thing that says you have the corporate funded, whatever you want to call, I call them lobbyists anyway in the broader sense, but whatever you want to call them, you have these corporate funded influencers taking people to these very luxurious resorts. And believe me, a stay at a luxurious resort can lower your resistance to all sorts of ideas. Aren't there any we hear about laws against bribery and gift giving and so on? Isn't that illegal?
Well, the ALEC tactics, I think, certainly skirt a number of ethics laws. I will give you the caveat that, I got my law degree by watching Matlock, so, for a grain of salt here, but, they're pretty smart about it. In Arizona, the conflict of interest laws and ethics laws are virtually impossible to violate because the legislators wrote them for themselves. So, as a legislature, I would have to almost literally introduce the Robbie Sherwood Full Employment Act in order to be a violation. And as long as 9 other Robbie Sherwoods were impacted, I would still be in the clear. So, the issue of having their travel paid for and food, those are exemptions to the rule. States differ, though, and there are, legal actions and challenges by organizations, watchdog organizations like Common Cause and Center for Media and Democracy that are pushing for the IRS to take a closer look at ALEC and their tactics to see if they are within the law. I'm probably not smart enough to tell you definitively that they are or they aren't.
Well, I got my law degree from Perry Mason, so it's even more out of date than yours. But okay, I guess as we wrap up, just a last few seconds here, what takeaway people should have, and what, if anything, can they do about this?
Well, I mean, the takeaway is that people need to understand how a lot of the legislation that impacts our lives gets made, and to display a more sophisticated understanding of ALEC. And there's a lot of resources out there. There's great documentaries that have been done by watchdog organizations and the Center for Media and Democracy and Progress Now and StandUpToALEC.org, where you can get the whole history of what they're doing. And you need to support policymakers who are devoted to standing up to put these special interests, in a real and honest way.
We'll have to leave it there, unfortunately. But Robbie Sherwood, Executive Director of Progress Now Arizona, thanks so much for joining us. And I do want to tell you, you're occupying a pivotal spot in the show between our coverage of the NCAA Cartel, as our guest called it, and I called it, and we'll be pivoting to our coverage of corporate tax breaks at the state level and what they're doing to the economy. So your commentary was very important. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much for the time and for asking me to be on. Appreciate it.
You bet. We will be right back after this. I'm Richard Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour. And we are back on the Zero Hour, and our next guest, who is coming to talk to us, continue this thread of state-level action, is Amanda Devecka-Rinear. Amanda is National Campaign Director for National People's Action, which has just put out a study on the disappearing corporate tax base. Among other things, that study has concluded... Well, but first, let's welcome Amanda to the show. Amanda, thanks so much for joining us.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to talk to you today.
And before we start, how did I do on the name pronunciation?
It was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Devecka-Rinear. Excellent.
Well, thank you, because if you have a name like Eskow, you get used to mispronunciations, even though it's totally phonetic. So if you go with a totally phonetic, you usually do okay. But listen, you guys put out a great report on the disappearing corporate tax base, and I think it's important, and people need to know about this. And you point out, among other things, that they're paying less in income taxes today than they did at the beginning of the recession, even though obviously with all the economic crises that have been spurred by the recession and jobs and wages and so on, we should be spending more rather than less at the government level. And your report, I don't want to steal your thunder, but it also said that if they paid it taxes at Eisenhower administration levels, they would have paid $957 billion last year, which is $683 billion more than they actually did. So, and this includes, if I understand correctly, both state and federal taxes, right?
Yes.
So what are the big takeaways from this report for you and for the organization?
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel like the big takeaways for us at National People's Action, for our partners at Center for Effective Government, and for the NPA affiliate organizations who are fighting on the ground is like, we've got to keep this in perspective. So, for example, Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement, right now their governor's talking about budget surplus, and of course wants to make more cuts to programs in Iowa and wants to give away more corporate tax breaks. There's not a surplus. It's been cut after cut after cut after cut. Programs have been defunded since 2008. And so suddenly, if there's a little bit more money in a budget because of cuts or something's evening out, people want to cut further. It is terrifying and dangerous. So what this report seeks to do is really put this in perspective and say corporations are kind of getting us on both ends. Not only are they tax dodging at the federal level, and many states and cities depend on funding from the government to run, but they're also tax dodging at the state level. And many states and cities have some percentage of their budget, though this report's certainly not as much as we could be getting from corporations who pay taxes within the state. So what we want to say here is there's a way to address the jobs crisis that we're facing. There's a way to shore up our safety net infrastructure. And one of the key paths to doing that is to say corporations who are doing well in this country, you need to do right by this country and pay your fair share.
I think this is so important, and I think one of the important, first of all, in terms of infrastructure, we have the American Society of Civil Engineers saying we need to spend $3.6 trillion to make our infrastructure safe and sound and roadworthy, as it were, and energy worthy, and yet we have people who need the work, so we're not doing that. In addition, just using the figures, your own statistics, and extrapolating, if we even charge corporations at Richard Nixon levels, much less Eisenhower levels, we'd have 5 million more jobs, because as you point out, 200 billion would mean 3 million jobs. So I'm, kind of roughly 5-something million jobs. And, people say, well, because of all the political talk we hear, well, I'm against government spending. But as you point out, $36 billion, just $36 billion, could fund 667,000 school teachers, first responders, librarians, highway crews, caretakers of parks. Who is against those? I mean, so I guess one of my questions is, the guest on before you was Progress Now, director of Progress Now Arizona, talking about ALEC's adventures there. I think the left or progressives or populists or Americans in general focus a lot on national politics, on corporate lobbying, corporate debates, congressional efforts, and so on. But isn't a lot of this going on, isn't a lot of this shortfall, these lost jobs, this crumbling infrastructure, also the result of things we're not paying as much attention to as a society, which is, if you will, the rigging or at least the influencing of state government action?
You know what? I think that's extremely true, and that there's a clear relationship between what's happening at the state level and what's happening at the federal level, right? I mean, part of what this report does is talk about funding in corporations and how they do. I mean, you can look at what happens with redistricting and, Republicans winning a number of state house races and then what's happening in Congress in terms of, this being, I believe, at this point, the Congress that has legislated the least since they started keeping records. So there's I think what we ought to do is we have to focus both on what's happening at the state level and what's happening at the national level, because A, they're interconnected, and B, the leaderships and breakthroughs may happen in states and then, of course, have more national impact and influence. They sometimes are happening at the federal level, and then they're able to come back to states. But I think if we're not fighting on both fronts, because we're really, and people say this, but kind of in the fight of our lives right now. I mean, the report points out 10 million jobs lost. I'm in New York City for a meeting today, and I've been meeting with some pretty amazing organizers from around the country and hearing stories about part-time work and contingent work and, 62-year-old women who just had their hours cut and are not going to be able to work anymore, or, Community Voices Heard, NPA's membership organization here that has a base in Harlem, had to say to them, hey, how are you all doing since that building exploded in Harlem because of that gas leak? You know, did you all have any members in that building? I mean, it's insane.
And that building exploded because it had the old iron piping, and there's something like 5,600 miles of that piping in New York State. So I don't remember the exact numbers, but, you know, we have work to do in this country. So you guys are on it. Your affiliate organizations, a lot of other people are on it. I think you're absolutely right. State and federal action is needed. So what's next for you guys? What are you going to research next in this area?
Man, that's a good question. I think we're going to probably let the action lead the research. We're in maybe the last quarter of state sessions this year, big state fights that have been happening, and probably about 10 or more state locations. And we're going to regroup and see what's happened, right? Like, you know, Maine, even though it was an off-budget year up in Maine this year, they had this pretty amazing vote at the State House 2 weeks ago to overturn the governor's veto and actually fully fund their services and budgets by cutting more corporate tax loopholes. This is sort of the second year in a row they've been able to go after corporate tax loopholes and then preserve programs that really matter to average Mainers. So, like, what's happening on the ground? How's that working? We've got corporate loophole fights that are happening, corporate tax transparency fights, because nobody really actually, we don't even have enough information about what these guys are doing at the state or even sometimes the federal level. And we're working. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
We're on it, and you're on it too. So where can people go to learn more about you guys and what you're doing?
Oh, thanks. They can check us out at National People's Action. It's www.npa-us.org on the interwebs. We would love to have people join us that way.
Oh, well, terrific. We've been talking with Amanda Devecka-Rinear and I just blanked on the organization of help me.
National People's Action.
National People's Action, npa-us.org, about our shrinking corporate tax base. Amanda, thanks so much for being on the show. Safe travels. I hope you're not driving on our corroded bridges and highways to get back home. And thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, RJ.
I'm Richard Eskow, and we will be right back. This is The Zero Hour.
This is The Zero Hour with RJ Eskow, produced by the WEACT Radio Network in Washington, D.C. and broadcast across the nation. Visit us online at thisisthezerohour.com or at youtube.com/thezerohour. Ladies and gentlemen, RJ Eskow.
Welcome back. I'm Richard Eskow, and we are about to start the third segment of today's The Zero Hour. And, you know, looking back on the first 2 hours, it's not accidental the way we programmed it. We're trying to make a point, and we're trying to paint a picture for you here. And sometimes you paint a picture by connecting the dots. So let's connect the dots a little bit on what we've learned and discussed so far today. We talked to Mark Ames of Pando Daily about what he calls the tectopus. That sounds a little bit to me like a transformer married a snuffleupagus and they had a child. But what he means by that, he's referring to the octopus, the Frank Norris classic novel about the way industrial centralization and power corrupts every aspect of life. We talked with Mark about how the Silicon Valley firms, led by some very unethical behavior from Steve Jobs and other corporate leaders, Eric Schmidt at Google, really conspired to fix the wages and job opportunities of hundreds of thousands of workers, perhaps as many as 1 million, illegally. and did that with no fear of punishment. Obviously, they did it in secret, but it's been reported. There is no apparent threats of retaliation right now. So we talked about the corporate cartel that is the Silicon Valley. Then a little later in the program, we talked with Patrick Hruby, who's a great voice for sports we like to have on the show. And Patrick, who writes for Sports on Earth, we discussed with us his reporting on the NCAA controversy going on, and specifically the students that have been organizing as a union, not so much to negotiate over wages, although there's perhaps no reason why they shouldn't do that, but to talk about issues that are getting neglected, of preventing brain damage, of aiding students who suffer concussions or other brain injuries, of controlling the use of student likenesses currently managed by the NCAA. You know, the NCAA makes an enormous amount of money, and yet you don't hear that talked about in March Madness. And if you press back, they say, well, we spend 90% of our money for the student athletes, but most of that money, or a huge chunk of it, goes to new buildings, new programs for the university, and to enormous salaries for athletic directors and coaches. So we talked about the cartel that is the NCAA. Excuse me. We talked to Robbie Sherwood in Arizona about how ALEC, the Koch brothers funded corporate lobbying group, although they deny they lobby, influence manipulation group, took a group of ALEC legislatures out for a lavish steak dinner, and how they influence state policy. And then we kind of talked about the outcome of all of this, which is that at the federal level, at the local level, state level, that is, corporations are paying historically low levels of taxes, amounts of taxes, and just 10% of what they should be paying would give us 1 million teachers. So if they were paying taxes at the Richard Nixon era level, they'd be able at the state and federal levels to create more than 5 million new jobs. So the government is starving for money. The economy is suffering. The public is suffering because corporations are able to manipulate their way out of paying taxes. You get the thread here. The thread is that corporations and wealthy individuals have way too much power, that really the NCAA controversy even, it's a matter of, as a society, as a nation, we've come to devalue the rights of people who work and produce for others to get fair compensation for their efforts and to have some control over their own destinies, whether it's foreclosure fraud, where banks are rescued by the government and then turn around and continue to illegally foreclose on people, whether it's the NCAA showing indifference to the fate of injured athletes, whether it's state legislatures offering tax breaks, even more tax breaks to corporations while we're in desperate need, and federal government as well, while we're in desperate need to repair our crumbling infrastructure, which is costing lives, to put people back to work, which is costing people's futures. It all ties together. It's all that great founding image that Occupy's movement gave to us. The 1% are really the 0.1% versus the 99%, or in all reality, the 99.5%, if you want to get technical about it. Our mission has to be to restore justice and balance. And that involves activism, which we promote here, that involves awareness, which we promote here, but it also involves a cultural shift back to the way we felt as a society in our heyday, economically and socially, when we were making progress in all the right directions, which is everybody has a say in the society. Everybody has a right to their place in the society. You don't have to be an oligarch to influence politics. You just have to be a citizen with the power of the pen and the power of the vote. That's the mindset we need to reinforce. That's the culture we need to rebuild so that we can make permanent and lasting change, whether it's in the law courts or on the basketball courts. I'm RJ Eskow, and we'll be back after this. This is the Zero Hour. We are back on the Zero Hour. I'm Richard Eskow, and in the next couple segments, we're going to be looking at the Supreme Court case, the Hobby Lobby case, of alleged religious freedom of corporations versus rights of individuals when it comes to health coverage. And our next guest has been doing a lot of terrific writing on the subject. Ian Millhiser is senior constitutional policy analyst at the Center for American Progress Action Fund and the editor of Think Progress Justice. He has great educational background. He has written it for a number of publications, and he's an attorney, among other things, and his coverage of this case has been excellent. Ian, thanks so much for being with us.
It's good to be here. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And listen, you've written a lot of great things about this. And, the sense I get reading between the lines on your coverage is, and of course I'll let you clarify, but maybe things aren't going so well. And particularly when it comes to Justice Kennedy, because Justice Kennedy brought abortions into the mix when I believe the subject is birth control. So I guess two-part question. Am I right to be a little nervous now, where I wasn't quite as nervous before? And B, is Justice Kennedy part of it? And either way, what is Kennedy saying?
Sure. So, I think it's important to understand how very conservative this Supreme Court is. In a lot of cases, I feel like the justices read the briefs and they, chat with their clerks and they do their research, and what they discover is that they are Republicans and Barack Obama is a Democrat, and they base a lot of decisions on that kind of research. That said, initially, I was fairly optimistic when I was sitting in the room listening to the arguments the other day. And like you said, the moment where it flipped is where Justice Kennedy suddenly turns and he says to the Solicitor General, if we uphold this law under your theory, that means Congress could force corporations to pay for abortions. Now, there's all kinds of reasons that's not going to happen, but the problem with Kennedy is that Kennedy hasn't cast a pro-choice vote since 1992. So if we're relying on a guy who hasn't cast a pro-choice vote in 22 years, if he thinks that this is an abortion case, that's not good news.
Well, and what's interesting to me about that, just from a kind of process perspective, is I suppose there are many decisions that could be made in court or legislatively that, if taken to their extreme, could lead to an abortion. They might not even be health insurance for medical cases, right? I mean, you could say, for example, if you're required to provide any benefits to a full-time employee, if a state law, for example, passes that, well, that might eventually, 3 or 4 steps down the road, lead to abortion. But is it just my impression, or does that feel like a reach that he's now making this an abortion case?
It's definitely a reach. Hobby Lobby tried to make this into an abortion case because what's at stake here is whether or not an employer can refuse to cover birth control in their employee health plan, which is something they're required to do by law. There's nothing about abortion in the law. This is about birth control. Hobby Lobby tried to make it about abortion because they claim that several forms of birth control that are covered by the law actually are forms of abortion, but they're wrong. They're not forms of abortion. And in fact, there's a brief from several medical groups explaining, no, these forms of birth control, they have nothing to do with eggs implanting in the uterus. They have nothing to do with anything that someone could reasonably describe as an abortion. What they do in most cases, they prevent ovulation. So, not an abortion.
And I have to say, just to interject for a second, that matter of my personal opinion, first of all, I think it's all insane, because I think that if people want to have an abortion under their health plan, I think they should be, personally, I think they should be able to. I think that's a matter of individual conscience, not legislation. And but if you don't mind my shifting a little bit, there's a fundamental philosophical issue here, which is the notion of corporate personhood, the idea that the corporation as an entity has religious beliefs that are violated. I mean, this is how I interpret it. I mean, I think I tweeted out the other day that Hobby Lobby's owners believe that life begins at the moment of incorporation. I mean, I think the idea that a corporation has such rights that those rights now extend to religious belief, quote unquote. Isn't that quite as? I mean, to me, that seems almost science fiction-y, and yet isn't that a fundamental presumption of this case?
Yeah, it's one of the two most important issues in this case, is whether or not corporations aren't just people, but now apparently they can be people of faith. And there's just something very weird about that concept. I disagree with the Citizens United case. The Citizens United case is the case that said that corporations could spend all the money they want to try to influence elections. But logistically, I know how that works. Like, if a corporation wants to give money to a super PAC, I know how a corporation cuts a check and gives it to a super PAC. How on earth does a corporation exercise religion? They don't go to church. They don't pray. If like the CEO, or if you put a yarmulke on their corporate headquarters, does that make it a Jewish corporation? If they wear a cross, does that, you put a cross on the building, does that make it a Christian? How does that actually work? I don't understand the logistics of how a corporation can have a religion.
Well, it's astonishing, and just a quick question. I'm going somewhere with this. I don't know this. Is Hobby Lobby publicly traded?
Now, Hobby Lobby is not publicly traded, and that's something that Chief Justice Roberts alluded to, is though there's no support in the law for this, maybe we could just say that these corporations that are held by a few family owners can have religions and publicly traded corporations cannot.
Well, and there's another dimension to this too, right? Which is that somehow where I'm going with this is, so somehow the religious beliefs of the owners exempt them from certain obligations, and yet the law exempts them from personal liability from the behavior of the corporation, doesn't it?
That's right. Yeah. Go ahead.
So my faith as a corporation owner exempts me from certain obligations in their argument, but my personhood, while it extends to my faith, doesn't extend to, say, the criminal acts of the corporation or the negligent acts of the corporation.
Right. I mean, they're certainly trying to have their cake and eat it too, because the whole reason corporations exist is so that the corporation is a different legal entity from the people who own it. And that way, if the corporation does something wrong, the people can't necessarily be charged with anything. That means that if the corporation goes bankrupt, the people who invest in it aren't responsible for the debts of the corporation. And those are really important protections, and I think they should exist. But the price of those protections is that the corporation is not a human being, and it's not the human being who owns it. And for that reason, like I said, it's very difficult to think that how a corporation could have a religious faith.
See, I'm old enough to remember, I'm really old, and I'm old enough to remember the early 70s when I was in college, and there were two competing theories being floated around at the time, arguably from the left and the right. One was, there was a famous paper called Should Trees Have Standing, arguing that trees as living beings should be considered persons for court purposes so that people could file briefs on their behalf to save forests and so on. The other was this Federalist Society notion of corporate personhood, and people went, now that's really crazy, to number two. Now, yet somehow trees don't have standing, but corporations it's being legitimately argued before the Supreme Court, who's accepted the case, have standing that is magical, that allows them to have faith without responsibility. What have I gotten wrong in this summary?
Yeah, the one thing I'll say is I think you can overplay the significance of the corporate personhood issue here, because that's actually not what I think is the most important issue in this case. The most important issue in this case is that for many decades, the Supreme Court has recognized essentially that my religious liberty stops at your body. So, I can have my beliefs, I can live my life the way I want, I can practice my faith the way I want, but the moment I start trying to exercise my faith in a way that steps on the rights of another person, or that hurts another person, or that tells them that they aren't allowed to have something that they're legally entitled to, that's what I'm not allowed to do. My religious liberty stops at your body, and that's fundamentally what Hobby Lobby is challenging here. They're trying to say that we're your employer, so we don't just get to pay you and decide what you have to do decide like what you have to do in order to get paid. We actually get to take away some of your legal rights because we object to those legal rights on religious grounds. And that's a scary road to go down if we start deciding that one person has the ability to impose their faith on another person.
Well, and let's play that out. Let's take that to its extreme, Kennedy style. Should Buddhist corporations or organizations be allowed not to pay taxes for food assistance that buys meat because they're vegetarian? Should Zoroastrian corporations who see the sacred reflected in fire be allowed not to contribute to their local firefighters? I mean, where does this end? I mean, isn't that also a dimension of the absurdity, in my opinion, that's my word, the absurdity of this case?
And that is the danger. Hobby Lobby is asking for, the way they put it in their brief, is whenever anyone has a religious objection to any law, that the government's only allowed to overcome that objection if they can survive the highest constitutional test known to constitutional law. They're asking for tremendous amounts of protection for religious liberty. And if you look at what the actual cases in the past have been, of course, you just had this big fight out in Arizona where people wanted to enshrine anti-gay discrimination into the law and say that if you object to serving gay people on religious grounds, you can do that. There are cases where employers said they want to pay women less than men because they thought that the man should be the head of the household, and that's God's plan. There are cases where people wanted to engage in race discrimination, and they claimed religious justification, people who didn't want to pay Social Security taxes, people who didn't want to pay the minimum wage. And if you
right. Well, look, let's be clear. A major religion in this country until relatively recently believed that black people were inferior. So can you discriminate against African Americans on religious grounds if this idea is upheld?
I mean, that's what the Bob Jones case was about in the 1980s. It was a case where you had a Christian college that at one point excluded black people altogether, and towards the end they just said that black people weren't allowed to date white people, and they had all these weird conduct restrictions.
And unfortunately we're going to have to leave it there, but Ian Millhiser, I'm delighted you're on this case, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us about it again.
Great, this has been fun.
You bet. Same here. Thanks again. We've been speaking with Ian Millhiser, whose writing can be found at thinkprogress.org/justice. And we will be staying on this case in our next segment. So please stick with us. I'm Richard Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.
Produced in Washington, D.C. Visit us online at weactradio.com or at youtube.com/weactradiodc.
And we are back on the Zero Hour, continuing our coverage of the Hobby Lobby case. I think you'll find this interesting. Our next guest is Sharona Coutts. Sharona is Director of Investigations and Research at RH Reality Check. She's an investigative reporter, and as the Director of Investigations and Research, wow, that sounds a little draconian, Sharona. She has exposed fraud and abuse in areas including pension funds, financial firms, for-profit colleges, aged care in New York City schools, and now she's on the Hobby Lobby case. Sharona, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I picture you in a vast, sprawling complex of buildings filled with investigators and researchers. Is that where you are?
I can't disclose my location.
Of course you can't. My mistake. I apologize. Now, you've written a piece. I should have known that. You've written a piece talking about the invisible hand in the Hobby Lobby case, which, of course, is a reference to the free market's invisible hand in fantasy economic theory. And your point being, I believe that free market groups are all over this case. Could you tell us a little bit about what you found?
Sure. So basically, what we discovered through a range of record requests from a number of states was that when we looked at the states who had filed briefs in support of Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Woods, and those briefs obviously arguing that these companies were quite right in saying that they, because of their religious beliefs, should not have to pay for health insurance that, amongst other things, would cover contraception. These states, submitted their briefs. There were 20 of them altogether, which presented this front to the public that, a lot of these state governments that represent their people have this genuinely held view about the religious freedom of corporations. Well, when we got these documents, what we discovered was that, in fact, a lot of these briefs had been coordinated and massaged by some of the most right-wing fundamentalist Christian groups in the country. And some of the names might be familiar to your listeners: the Cato Institute, the Heritage Foundation, and there's another one, the Alliance Defending Freedom. And I think we're going to hear a lot more about that organisation from now on, because although until now they've somewhat flown under the radar, they were sitting on $40 million of assets midway through last year, and they are increasingly influential, often behind the scenes.
Well, and now let's talk about the behind-the-scenes aspect of it, just so that our listeners understand, and so that I understand. We're really talking about these briefs, whether they're amicus curiae or cert briefs or whatever they are. There's briefs that appear to be one thing but are really masterminded they're not what they appear to be. Is that, in essence, what you're finding?
I think the masterminded word is key. So, in litigation, particularly in front of the Supreme Court, most people understand that in litigation there's always at least two parties involved. That's where you get a legal fight. And in constitutional cases, often one of those parties is the government. That can be a state government, or, as in this case, that can be the federal government. In the Hobby Lobby case, on the other side of that fight was the company Hobby Lobby, and then there was also Conestoga Woods, another company. Okay? Now, because of the issues that are raised in these cases and how important they are, and these difficult constitutional questions that they brought up, it's actually very normal for third parties to also want to weigh into these legal fights. That's where you get the amicus curiae brief. It's called Friend of the Court, and it's actually a good thing. The idea is that the court has the benefit of arguments and facts from these experts who are not, they don't have a dog in the fight. They're experts in that, they have this expertise, or alternatively, they are impacted by the issues at stake, and that's what gives them standing to submit a brief. So there's nothing wrong with that in principle at all, and in fact, I think a lot of people would see that as a good thing for democracy. What we found, though, was that these briefs from these states, and by and large very conservative states, when you see a brief from Michigan, Ohio, West Virginia, Alabama, I think most people in the general public assume that the executive of those states, along with elected representatives, including if they're elected attorneys general, that they've come along and decided to intervene in these cases because of the public interest. Because now,
and let me just jump in for a second, Sharona. We're talking with Sharona Coutts of RH Reality Check. So you're saying these are briefs which come from the state government?
Yes.
So state governments list a few states, the states you just mentioned: Michigan, where else? Alabama,
Ohio was a big one. Also, West Virginia. There was 20 of them in all. And basically they include, a lot of the states that you'd sort of associate with the conservative side of the spectrum. And let me say...
So let me just summarize, just to clarify here. So we're really talking about, I noticed in your reporting, you mentioned that the organizing included our less religious-friendly friends from California wrote something. So here you have something where, whether you agree or not, the Attorney General or the Governor of California decided to send in a friend of the court brief stating California's position on this case, and out of their support for the public interest, and you have these background, quote-unquote, free market corporate groups coordinating a massive response from corporate-friendly politicians in other states, inundating the court and making it look like there is a massive public interest objection to this around the country. Is that a fair summary of the story?
That is a beautiful summary of the story.
Good.
That's exactly right. And I hasten to say that you'd expect to see the same thing on the progressive side, on the pro-choice side. It wouldn't surprise me in the least to see some element of coordination between folks who are in favour of reproductive rights, who would be aware of and, in some cases, answer questions that states such as California had, because it's a good thing that someone's stepping in to help organise these efforts. But what we found here was that the Alliance Defending Freedom, they would write emails to officials in Michigan and basically say, thanks very much for that brief that you filed, Michigan. Could we suggest that you change this argument or add that one or alter this one? So it went beyond saying, right, you cover these issues, someone else, to avoid duplication, is going to cover these other issues. It went as far as trying to influence the actual arguments that were being made.
So while that may or may not be illegal, I suspect it's not. It's certainly a manipulation of the Supreme Court process and a manipulation of public opinion. And who, in the 90 seconds or so we have, 2 minutes we have left, who are the people that are behind this?
The Alliance Defending Freedom is an Arizona-based nonprofit, and it is associated with fundamentalist Christian views. They have been at work behind the scenes, sending in detailed briefs to states across the country, asking often the attorneys general to introduce pretty radical laws that would destroy women's rights to abortion and other things like that. In this age of Citizens United, it's pretty difficult to find out a lot of information about these groups, but I can tell you that given the role that we now see that they're playing and the prominence that they're playing and the coziness that they have with staff in a lot of state offices, including junior staff asking the higher-ups at the Alliance Defending Freedom to pray for them to have passed the bar exam, I suspect that we're going to be hearing a lot more about the Alliance Defending Freedom this year.
And I hope you'll be staying on the case. We've been talking with Sharona Coutts, who has been speaking with us from her vast underground intelligence complex at RH Reality Check. Sharona, thanks so much for joining us.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
You bet. I'm Richard Eskow, and we will be back after this message with a different kind of segment for you on the science and anti-science of April Fool's Day. I'm RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour. And we are back on the Zero Hour. And with us, again, we always enjoy having her, is Gemma Tarlach, who's Senior Associate Editor with Discover Magazine. And Gemma, if you don't remember her biography from last time, has worked in Munich as a chambermaid, went to culinary school in New York, got a master's in journalism from Madison, and has been all over the world since then. Gemma, I'm still hung up on that. I love that you have that chambermaid in Munich in your biography. So let me start out by making you feel at home. Wo ist mein Lederhosen, Fräulein?
Unbedingt. Das ist nicht so schön. Bitte.
Oh, that's way above my head. But thanks so much for being with us. And listen, we were going to talk to you because you guys at Discover Magazine have been all over the April Fool's Day thing. We're almost at April Fool's Day now, and you guys did one of the famous ones. You've done a couple stories on it, but you guys had a great story back in 1995 that's gotten replayed a couple times, and that's the strange mole-like animal that melts ice tunnels with its head. And, for some reason, I just love that story, particularly the part, this is my favorite part, that it could answer the long-standing Antarctic mystery. What happened to the heroic polar explorer Philippe Poisson, who disappeared in Antarctica without a trace in 1837, and the experts saying emperor penguins can be as much as 4 feet tall. Poisson was 5'6". To the ice borers, he would have looked like a big penguin.
Well, I'm glad you like that story because I have to admit, as we note in our current April issue, that story holds the record for provoking the largest amount of hate mail from readers. So it was one of those either love it or hate it stories, and people who hated it really, really, really hated it. So I'm glad you're not in that camp.
So were you rebuked by the Friends of the Ice Borer Moles Association, or what made people mad about it? I mean, can't they understand that an April Fool's Day thing is a joke?
Well, I think it's really interesting because this obviously happened way before my time at Discover, but we still,
you were
to
too
this
busy
day,
doing mitered corners on beds in Munich. Okay,
I'd like to one day explore why you're so obsessed with the chambermaid thing. That was a very small item on my resume, but never mind.
But it's on your resume. It just feels random. That's all. I mean, I was a janitor. I swept up garbage at a shopping mall, in Nanuet, New York, but it's not on my resume. I just think it's cool that it's on your resume. And you can use the shopping mall thing against me anytime. I was one of those guys in the brown uniform with the thing that opens and the little broom, and you walk around and people say insulting things. That was me. So anyway,
well,
I'll
I have
put it
to admit, when
resume.
people fixate on something on my resume, they tend to fixate on the fact that I lived in Antarctica for 20 months. But hey, different things for different folks. But talking about the wonderful, speaking of Antarctica, the Antarctic naked ice borer, I think it provoked so much mail, and we still get mail to this day, almost 20 years later. We'll get a random postcard or letter saying, hey, remember that story you did? Don't do stuff like that ever again. I think it's because, people really are concerned with the credibility of science. The credibility of science has been undermined a lot as, more and more it becomes a political issue, and people use it for their own agenda, and statistics, which always get misused pretty much throughout history. They're used and twisted and bent, and people, there's a large chunk of the population that, as we note in our April issue, actually thinks global warming and climate change is a hoax. So I think people take it very seriously. A lot of people, when a science magazine says something, they want it to be credible. And, our stuff is credible. We go through several rounds of editing and fact-checking and accuracy, detailed reporting, etc. But we like to have fun every now and then, and April Fool's is the perfect time to do it. Unfortunately, some readers don't agree. And
well, let me ask you, I didn't expect to go off on this tangent, but it's kind of interesting. And you don't have to answer if it would make you uncomfortable. But were they atheists who think that there is a war on science? I totally agree with it, but that there is a war on science and that we need to fight back. But I mean, were they coming from the kind of Richard Dawkins perspective of you don't mess with science?
Yeah. Well, it's been a real range, and obviously this has been going on for about 20 years. And I've only been with Discover for about 15 months, so I haven't read all of the letters. But the ones I've seen, and the ones we get today, they're people who are extremely sensitive about any kind of suggestion that science is anything but, very straight, very rigorous, very sort of humorless. And, the funny thing is, I think everything in life has an aspect of fun and humor. And kind of going off on another tangent, just last week I wrote about a new dinosaur discovered that the paleontologists were calling the chicken from hell, the 10-foot-tall chicken, and they just kept calling it hell's chicken, chicken from hell. I mean, that's clearly, the scientists having some fun. And I think it's crazy to think there's no room for humor in science. But just because of the beating science has taken in terms of, politicians, I think, some people are really uneasy about any suggestion that there's a little bit of fun in science, which is too bad.
To paraphrase Oscar Wilde, laughing well is the best revenge as far as I'm concerned. So, do you know any other good hoax stories? Have you
Oh my
been
gosh,
involved?
how much time do you have?
Well, I don't know, 3 minutes, something like that. Okay. 2.5. Hit me with a couple of your best shots.
Well, there are the huge ones that are known around the world, whether it be crop circles or Piltdown Man, where they took a human skull and orangutan jaw, and serious folks were saying, yes, this is the missing link.
But that wasn't an April Fool's Day hoax. That was a hoax. Although you're right, that's good. But crop circles, this is all like M. Night Shyamalan did that movie based on crop circles. I think it was called Signs.
Yeah.
And I kept sitting there. Did you see it?
Oh, yeah.
Because I kept sitting there thinking, wait a minute, the premise of this movie, as I understand it, is that the aliens can travel hundreds of thousands of light years through interstellar space, but they need a big arrow on the ground to find Philadelphia.
Yeah,
what?
I don't think we should even bring Hollywood into a discussion of hoaxes and credibility when it comes to science.
Right,
but,
and his aliens dissolved on contact with water, so of course they came to a planet that was 90% water, because who wouldn't do that?
We're drawn to that which destroys us. I think Nietzsche said that.
right. Well, he is kind of a Nietzschean filmmaker, but so what's another good hoax in the couple minutes we got left?
Well, it's definitely an April Fool's hoax per se, but I love it because it's within the scientific community. It's kind of a hoax meant to improve credibility, and it's called a blind injection, and it's when researchers will kind of sneak in some wrong data into ongoing research just to see if the researchers conducting that study notice it and pick it up, just to make sure they're doing a very detailed review of all the data. And it's actually, once they pick it up and say, hey, this is wrong, it actually firms up and helps solidify the legitimacy of their study, because they were able to find the errors that were intentionally put in the study. And I love that because, people kind of dismiss hoaxes as worthless, whatever. But here's a great example where a hoax actually, it's for the good. It's using its powers for good, not evil.
Well, that is a great one, and I think we'll probably end on that, although I think it's also worth noting that there are these guys, I don't know if they're still around, who used to do very funny science satires. The scientists themselves, they used to publish the Journal of Irreproducible Results. You remember those guys? So there is good fun science out there. I'm of the opinion that everything is better with a little more fun included. And it's always fun to have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. We've been speaking with Gemma Tarlach, who is Senior Associate Editor with Discover Magazine. Oh, and Gemma, by the way, I found those Lederhosen. So
schön.
So I hope you'll come back again even after that. So,
okay.
And that's it. That's it for today. We've had another episode of the Zero Hour. We've talked about the rigging, cartels in technology and sports. We've talked in politics. We've talked about the invisible hand rigging the Hobby Lobby case. We've talked about the absurdity of their argument. And we've talked just in time for April Fool's Day about some of the great science hoaxes of all time. I hope you've enjoyed the program and you'll come back next week. I'm Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.